We begin tonight with the man who terrorized Washington for years. The Green River Killer pleaded guilty to the murders of dozens of women in King County, leaving several families grieving throughout the state. Though he's been locked up for decades, tonight, Gary Ridgway is back in King County.
What do you do when the man who killed 49 women sits across from you, emotionless, and refuses to show any remorse? The world watched as Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, finally came face to face with his victims' families in court. What happened next will haunt you forever. This case is more than just about the lives he took. It's about the people who were left behind. The families who were shattered, their grief overshadowed by a man who believed he could remain hidden in plain sight. Stay with us as we unravel the darkest secrets of Gary Ridgway, from his chilling confessions to the life he leads behind bars, and the speech that moved even this cold killer to tears. The chilling tone sets the stage. There is more than just the capture of a killer to uncover here. What we're about to share is a deep dive into not just the mind of a murderer, but into the wreckage of his actions and the scars left behind. Gary Ridgway's story is a haunting portrait of what happens when darkness is allowed to remain unchecked, until it finally comes to light. The early 1980s in King County, Washington, were marked by an unsettling rise in disappearances. A time when women, many of them young and vulnerable, began to vanish without a trace. In the shadows, a quiet predator lurked. For years, the community remained unaware that one of the most prolific serial killers in American history walked among them, undetected, hiding in plain sight. It was 1982, a year when the streets of King County began to feel unsafe, especially for young women. Seattle, nestled in the heart of Washington state, was a city that carried a growing sense of unease. Women, often runaways or sex workers, started disappearing without a trace. Families were left confused, desperate, searching for their loved ones, but the police had no solid leads. It wasn't until August of that year that the body of Wendy Caulfield, just 16 years old, was found by a passerby along the Green River, a river that would become forever linked to unspeakable horrors. What the community did not know, what the families could never have imagined, was that the Green River Killer had begun his reign of terror. Gary Ridgway, a man who would go on to be convicted of killing 49 women, but who claimed to have murdered even more, was walking freely among them. For nearly 2 decades, he was able to evade detection, hiding in plain sight as a husband, a father, and a man who held down a steady job at a local truck manufacturing plant. The perfect predator, silent, methodical, and invisible. Gary Ridgway's childhood was marked by dysfunction, humiliation, and early signs of violent behavior, which may have played a role in shaping his later crimes. Born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, he was the middle child of 3 boys. His family later moved to SeaTac, Washington, near Seattle. His father, Thomas Ridgway, was a bus driver who often ranted about women of the street, which may have influenced Ridgway's later choice of victims. His mother, Mary Ridgway, was described as dominant, dressed not like a mother and was always flasher. Ridgway wet the bed frequently into his early teens, and he said his mum would always wash after him as far as going towards his genital. Some reports suggest she was overbearing and controlling, including bathing him well into adolescence, which may have contributed to his later violent sexual urges. He reportedly harbored conflicted feelings of attraction and hatred toward his mother. As a teenager, Ridgway lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him in the ribs. The boy survived, and Ridgway later said he did it just to see what it felt like to kill someone. He struggled in school, had a low IQ, around 80, and was placed in special education classes. After graduating high school at age 20, he joined the Navy and was sent to Vietnam. During his service, he reportedly frequented sex workers and contracted STDs, which may have fueled his later hatred toward them. Ridgway's childhood combined abuse, humiliation, and early violent behavior, which, along with his low intelligence and unstable relationships, likely contributed to his later crimes. Gary Ridgway's relationship with his family was far from the one they believed. On the outside, he he was a normal man. He married twice, fathered a son, and appeared to be a hard-working, family-oriented individual. But beneath the facade was a monster, one who would keep his darkest secret hidden for years. Ridgway's first wife, Martha, married him in the 1970s, believing in the image he projected. She had no idea of the darkness brewing inside him. Their marriage would end in 1981, only a year before his killing spree would begin. It is said that Ridgway's marriage to Martha ended because of his infidelity and his apparent emotional detachment, but at the time, no one could have predicted what lay ahead. In the 1980s, Ridgway married his second wife, Judith, a woman who would stand by him for decades. They had a son together, and for a time, their life seemed normal. Ridgway's wife would later recall the small, strange behaviors she noticed, but none of them were enough to raise alarm. Judith could never have imagined that her husband, the man she shared her home with, was capable of such monstrous acts. Even after Ridgway was arrested in 2001, Judith stayed with him. She believed the story he fed her, that he was just a victim of bad circumstances, misunderstood, and misjudged. The truth only came crashing down when Ridgway's confessions were revealed, and even then, it took a toll on her. The woman who had been by his side for years, who had raised his son, suddenly had to face the fact that she had lived with a killer. After his confession, their marriage ended. Ridgway's family, the people who trusted him most, were blindsided by his horrific actions. For years, his true nature remained a hidden truth, known only to the victims he left in his wake. Gary Ridgway's first confirmed victim was Wendy Caulfield, a 16-year-old girl who vanished in August of 1982. Her body was discovered by the Green River in King County, the first sign that a serial killer was at work. What followed was an escalating spree of murders, each victim discarded along the river, hidden in remote areas, left to be forgotten. But these women would never be forgotten, not by their families, and certainly not by the world. The list for some of victims: Wendy Caulfield, August 1982, a young, 16-year-old girl who, like many others, found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her body was found in the Green River, the first of many. Deborah Bonner, 1983, a mother, a daughter, a sister, taken too soon. Her life was abruptly ended, leaving behind a family who would never know the true story of her disappearance until years later. Opal Mills, 1983, another life lost, discarded like the others. Opal's story would remain a mystery for years, but her memory lived on in the hearts of those who loved her. Kathy Hendricks, 1984, a woman with so much life left to live, taken from her family far too early. Her remains would be found years later, but Kathy's face would forever be etched into the minds of her family. Michelle Welch, 1986, Michelle's disappearance marked a shift in Ridgway's behavior. As his confidence grew, so did his brutal methods. He was getting closer to the edge. Heidi Sable, 1989, a woman with dreams of a different life. Heidi's hopes were taken away with her. But her name would be added to the growing list of victims, innocent women whose lives had been erased. Chandra Whitehead, 1989, another woman, another life. Her family never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, but their search ended in heartbreak. Melissa Smith, 1983, a vibrant young woman whose disappearance marked yet another case of the unknown. Melissa's family had no answers, only questions. Maureen Feeney, 1990, her life, too, was extinguished by a man who showed no mercy. Maureen's family fought for years for justice, only to find it after Ridgway's confession years later. Rita S., 1990, identity still unknown, a woman whose identity remains a mystery, lost in the darkness of Ridgway's past. Who was she? Why was she taken? These questions remain unanswered. Ridgway's killing spree didn't just end with these women. The exact number of his victims remains unclear. Ridgway has confessed to killing 49 women, but he has hinted at a much higher number. Some believe the true body count could be as high as 71 or even 90, but we may never know the full extent of his crimes. What we do know is this: these women were more than just statistics. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. They were loved, they had lives to live, and their murders left irreparable damage on the families who were left behind. And though Ridgway may never truly understand the weight of his actions, the families he destroyed will never forget the pain he caused. The Green River Killer was not just a name. It was a terrifying reality for those who lived in the area, a cold reminder that danger could lurk in even the most unsuspecting places. A quiet man, blending into society, hiding behind the mask of a family man, all while committing horrific acts that no one could have imagined. The nightmare had only just begun. The search for the Green River Killer would continue for years, a haunting chase that would end in one of the most shocking and unexpected ways imaginable. But for now, the case was just beginning, and no one knew that the most chilling part of the story was still yet to come. It was only through DNA that the cold case began to unravel. In 2001, Ridgway was linked to the crimes through genetic evidence. It was the DNA match that finally brought him into the spotlight. Despite his outward appearance as a mild-mannered man, Ridgway exhibited classic signs of psychopathy. He often claimed he killed to release his urges, showing no emotional attachment to the women he murdered. The years of searching, the countless hours of investigating, the frustrating dead ends, all led up to one moment in 2001 that would change everything. After nearly 2 decades, the Green River Killer, the monster who had eluded justice for so long, was finally caught. The arrest came not with a dramatic chase, but with the quiet certainty of DNA. The same technology that had failed in earlier years now became the key to unraveling the mystery. Gary Ridgway's arrest was a culmination of years of painstaking work. It wasn't just the DNA evidence linking him to the murders, it was his arrogance, the belief that he would never be caught. When detectives first began to piece together the evidence against him, they had no idea they were about to confront the man responsible for at least 49 deaths. The real shock, however, came when Ridgway finally confessed. It was a stunning moment of clarity, the kind of confession that left people stunned in disbelief. When Ridgway was finally confronted with the evidence linking him to the murders, he didn't hesitate. "I killed them. I killed them all," he said, his voice steady, as though he were discussing a trivial matter. No emotion, no hesitation. He wasn't sorry. He didn't even try to justify his actions. His words were cold, calculated, a matter of fact, almost detached. The impact of his confession was immediate. The world had waited for this moment for decades, and now it was here. The man who had terrorized the streets of King County and beyond, taking the lives of young women, was sitting in front of investigators, admitting to the most horrific of crimes. And yet, in his eyes, there was no remorse. He wasn't haunted by the faces of his victims or the families left behind. He was simply a man giving a statement, devoid of humanity. Ridgway's confession sent shockwaves through the public. 49 women, all of them victims of his sickening obsession. He didn't stop at just one. His spree had lasted nearly 2 decades, and the victims were not just numbers in a case file. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, real people with lives that had been taken without mercy. The trial that followed was one of the most emotionally charged proceedings in recent memory. The families of the victims were finally given their moment in the courtroom, the chance to speak directly to Gary Ridgway, to confront the man who had caused them so much pain. It was a painful and powerful moment, one that no one would ever forget. As Ridgway sat there, his hands folded in front of him, his expression was blank, almost vacant. There was no emotion in his eyes, no sign of the deep regret that one might expect from someone who had committed such horrific acts. He sat there, almost unmoved, as family members of the victims spoke. Sherry Garrett, sister of victim Cynthia Hines, "Today is not about Gary Ridgway, it is about my sister, Cynthia Jean Hines, and the other 47 women. I am here to take back everything you kept, pieces of my soul, parts of my heart, and my destiny. The future is ahead, and I need them. I am taking back my yesterdays." Kathy Mills, mother of Opal Mills, even if you may say you're sorry, Mr. Ridgway, it won't bring back Opal. You have held us in bondage all these years because we have hated you, we wanted to see you die, but it's all going to be over now. That is, provided we can forgive you. Gary Leon Ridgway, I forgive you. I forgive you. You can't hold me anymore. My life now is lived to one day be with little Opal. Carol Estes, mother of Deborah Estes. Deborah had just turned 15 years old, and she was just an immature teenager trying to find her way in life before it was snuffed out by Gary Ridgway. I will never forgive him for that. He's destroyed my life, he's destroyed my daughter's life. There isn't any life for me anymore. He's going to go to hell, and that's where he belongs. Sarah King, daughter of Carol Christensen, I was only 5 when my mother died and my dad told me I would never see her again. The one thing I want you to know is that there was a daughter at home. I was that daughter at home, waiting for my mommy to come home. And I've had to grow up the last 20 years, and this has been my life. I didn't have a life before this, I was so young. I grew up, I've had to defend my mother. She wasn't a prostitute. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was a sister. And we miss her. Michelle Blair, sister of Giselle Levorn, Giselle was only 17 years old. She was murdered by that animal sitting over there who we have to call a man. He does not deserve to live, or breathe. But he doesn't deserve to die. Dying would be too easy for him. Nancy Gabbard, mother of Sandra Gabbard, Nancy told the court her daughter's murder destroyed her family, including Sandra's sister, who was plagued by depression, eventually committing suicide 10 years after Sandra's remains were found. Gary Ridgway is an evil creature who I would condemn to many, many long years of anguish and despair. He doesn't deserve a quick, painless, humane death. Tim Meehan, brother of Mary Meehan, I can only hope that someday, someone gets the opportunity to choke you unconscious 48 times, so you can live through the horror that you put our daughters, our sisters, our mothers through. May God have no mercy on your soul. Helen Dexter, mother of Constance Nayon, Constance was murdered 2 weeks before her 21st birthday. I don't know how to describe the pain inside. There's no words for it. Helen described anger not only at Ridgway, but at the media, the prosecutors and investigators. I believe that had the investigations gone right in the last 20 years, many of us would not be in this court today. Vicky Ware, sister of Kelly Ware, she was a beautiful sister and loved very much, and what it did to my parents and family was terrible. He's an animal. I don't wish for him to die. I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death. Hopefully terminal cancer. This will not be the last time I will see you, because I will see you in hell. Deanna Brewer, sister of Shirley Sherrill, you stole my best friend, my sister. You've denied my children the opportunity to know their aunt. My sister was somebody. She was loved. She ran track. She was on a drill team. She belonged to Camp Fire. She loved to dance. All these things you stopped. She had dreams. You stopped those, too. Shars Wood Summer, sister of Shonda Summers, you manipulated the system to save your own life. After today, I will not give this parasite a thought. I'm talking about you. It's time to change the laws. We have to stand up to elected officials. Letter read on behalf of family of Kimmy Kai Pitzer, there will always be a sense of loss because of her untimely death, and wishes for her to be an aunt, a mother, a sister, and confidant. Wishes are part of being human, and I wish for you peace. Jose Malvar Jr., brother of Marie Malvar, somebody is going to have the glory to meet you up close and personal in a way that you don't want to meet them. It's just a matter of time. Deborah Bonner's mother, who had lost her daughter to Ridgway's brutality, stood before him. Her voice trembled with grief and anger, but there was a certain strength in the words she spoke. She said, "You stole my daughter, my best friend. You robbed us of her laughter, her joy, her future. What I want you to know, Ridgway, is that no matter what, you can never take away the love we still have for her. You will never take her from us. She lives in our hearts, and that's something you can never touch. But then, one voice cut through the courtroom, a voice that would reach into the depths of Ridgway's psyche, even if he didn't fully understand it. Robert Rule, Linda Jane Rule's father, told him, "Mr. Ridgway, there are people here who hate you. I'm not one of them. I forgive you for what you've done. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that is forgive, and he doesn't say to forgive just certain people, he says forgive all. So you are forgiven. My daughter was 16 at the time you killed her. My wife and I were separated, and she had to live on the street. She did things I may not have been proud of, but she was still a little girl. She was still my daughter." The words hit Ridgway like a blow, but his expression remained unchanged. He didn't cry. He didn't shout in anger. He simply sat there, his face a mask of indifference. It was almost as if he couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what had been said to him. But then, something unexpected happened. As Robert Rule continued to speak, a single tear began to form in Ridgway's eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. A tear that slowly made its way down his cheek, a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who had spent so many years hiding behind walls of apathy. The sight of this tear, though small, was significant. It wasn't an outpouring of grief or remorse, it was a crack in the armor of a man who had never once shown an ounce of empathy. It was a fleeting moment that suggested even the most hardened of killers could still feel the weight of their actions, even if they didn't fully understand the pain they had caused. As Ridgway wiped the tear away, it was as if he was trying to hide the humanity that had momentarily surfaced. The room, however, had seen it. The tear was a reminder of the complicated nature of his existence. Despite all the evil he had committed, there was still a trace of the man he had once been, a man who could experience emotions, even if only for a brief moment. The rest of the courtroom watched in silence, unsure of what to make of Ridgway's reaction. Was it remorse? Was it guilt? Or was it simply a fleeting human response to the overwhelming pain in the room? For the victims' families, the impact of the trial was immeasurable. Their words, spoken directly to the man who had taken their loved ones, would stay with them forever. But for Ridgway, the experience was far less cathartic. His lack of remorse, his cold demeanor, the fact that he could sit there and listen to the grief of the families without feeling any genuine sorrow, it was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire trial. In the end, Ridgway's confession had sealed his fate. The evidence was undeniable. But it was the emotional weight of the victims' families, their raw, unfiltered pain, that would be the defining moment of his trial. It wasn't just the legal consequences he faced, it was the moral and emotional reckoning that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As the courtroom emptied and the families left, their words still reverberating in the air, Gary Ridgway remained seated. Word spread quickly about his crimes, and soon he became the subject of constant threats from fellow inmates seeking vengeance for the families he had destroyed. At the time of his incarceration, the prison system didn't know what to do with Ridgway. For his own safety, he was moved multiple times to different facilities. At one point, he was placed in high-security isolation, a small, solitary cell where he could do little more than think about the devastation he had caused. Some say that his constant relocation was a result of desperation to keep him alive. Other inmates didn't care about the law, they cared about the justice that had been denied to the victims for so many years. And they weren't willing to let Ridgway escape that reckoning. In prison, Ridgway had to come to terms with the fact that he was no longer in control. His life, once one of secrecy and manipulation, was now one of constant scrutiny. But even in the face of this, he found a way to adapt. His routine became monotonous, predictable, a far cry from the adrenaline-fueled life of a serial killer. Instead of seeking out victims, Ridgway now sought solitude. He spent hours a day reading and praying, focusing on religious studies as a way to fill the void left by his monstrous actions. Many believe that this was his attempt at self-redemption, though, for many, the idea of Ridgway ever finding peace was unfathomable. Despite his apparent efforts to maintain a quiet existence, Ridgway's unapologetic nature continued to emerge. He was still a man focused on survival, doing what was necessary to get through each day. Prison authorities noted that Ridgway rarely socialized with other inmates, preferring to keep to himself. His days were filled with the echoes of his own thoughts, the grim memories of what he had done, and perhaps a deep, nagging awareness that no matter how many times he prayed or how many scriptures he read, the darkness of his past would always follow him. How Ridgway spends his days. In isolation, Ridgway's routine became his only solace. The daily rituals of reading and reflection were his escape from the relentless weight of his crimes. Each day blended into the next as he lived in the confines of his cell. But there was more to his life in prison than just survival. His thoughts, fueled by years of secrecy and lies, had nowhere to go. Ridgway was a man who had spent most of his life hiding the truth, and now, in the silence of his cell, he was forced to face it. Rumors floated among the prison population that Ridgway had become obsessed with religion in his later years. Whether this was a genuine attempt at redemption or just another part of his survival strategy, no one could be sure. What was clear, however, was that Ridgway remained unrepentant in his thoughts and actions. His focus was not on the women he killed or the families he destroyed, his focus was on himself. The voices of the victims' families, so loud in the courtroom, so filled with grief and anger, had faded into the background of his thoughts. The victims' families after the trial, for the families of Gary Ridgway's victims, the trial was not the end of their suffering, it was only a step toward healing. The families who had been torn apart by the disappearances of their loved ones, the families who had waited for decades without answers, were finally able to find some semblance of closure. But no amount of justice could bring back the daughters, the sisters, the mothers who were lost. The pain that was once raw now simmered beneath the surface, a reminder of all that had been taken from them. For some, the trial felt like a bittersweet victory. Yes, Ridgway had been convicted. Yes, the world knew the truth. But their loved ones were still gone, and nothing could fill the void left by their absence. Many families chose to speak out, to ensure that their loved ones' memories would not be forgotten. They didn't just want justice. They wanted to make sure that these women, the women who had been reduced to mere statistics, were remembered for who they truly were. For Gary Ridgway, life in prison was nothing like the life he had known on the outside. His world had been reduced to the confines of his cell, where his only focus was survival. But for the families of the victims, the fight for justice would never end. They would continue to speak out, to remember their lost loved ones, and to make sure that the world would never forget the truth about the Green River Killer, and the countless lives he destroyed. As the years go by, Gary Ridgway remains behind bars, cut off from the world he once inhabited. But for the victims' families, the healing process continues. Their fight is far from over. They are determined to make sure that the memories of their loved ones live on, forever etched into the fabric of history. As of February 2025, there have been notable developments in the case of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. In September 2024, Gary Ridgway was transferred from the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla to the King County Jail in Seattle. This marked his first return to Seattle in 21 years. The King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office confirmed his booking, stating that Ridgway was placed on an institutional hold. However, the specific reasons for this transfer have not been publicly disclosed. After a brief stay, Ridgway was returned to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. This move occurred in mid-September 2024, and details regarding the duration of his stay in King County Jail or the reasons for his transfer remain limited. Advancements in DNA technology have led to the identification of additional victims linked to Ridgway. In January 2024, authorities identified the remains of a previously unknown victim, Lyles, who had been discovered in 2003. This identification was made possible through DNA testing, underscoring the ongoing efforts to bring closure to the victims' families. Law enforcement agencies continue to investigate potential links between Ridgway and other unsolved cases. The King County Sheriff's Office has stated that they remain actively engaged in investigating potentially related cases, although specific details about these investigations have not been publicly released. These developments highlight the ongoing efforts to address the legacy of Gary Ridgway's crimes and the continuous pursuit of justice for the victims and their families. The story of Gary Ridgway is far from over, even now. His name is synonymous with terror, with a reign of violence that lasted for over 2 decades. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's have a discussion about the chilling reality of one of the most notorious serial killers in history. This case has left us all with more than just horror, it's left us with questions that may never be answered. But together, we can continue to search for the truth, to honor the victims whose lives were stolen, and to ensure that their names are never forgotten. If you were disturbed by the depth of this story, subscribe to our channel for more chilling true crime cases. Every story deserves to be told, and we'll keep bringing you the unsettling, the unsolved, and the haunting mysteries of the criminal world. Like this video if it left you disturbed, share it with someone who needs to hear the chilling truth about Gary Ridgway's reign of terror, and don't forget to leave your thoughts below. Your voice matters, and your theories could be the key to uncovering the parts of this story that remain hidden. Stay tuned for more dark cases, more untold stories, and more twists that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Because in the world of true crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems.